day. Welcome to another episode of the Value Engineering Experts. Just a bit of news. We're working on our 188 CO2 FANG hotline. If anybody wishes to be a guest on the show, please inquire with Sarah Taylor or myself. Until the hotline is fully up, call my cell phone, 519-240-6334. Happy to consult or give you free advice on how to reduce your waste below grade. We have a basic message to lower CO2, which always lowers cost and schedule. In any case, today I'm very excited to have a friend, a past mentor, a man with immense experience in design, build, construction and below grade. Charles Kranz, professional engineer, and really a great example of how to manage a resume. Chuck, you got a great resume, by the way. I'm impressed with your pursuit of, as you always say, Chuck, you're always learning, right?
You got always wanting to learn, yes.
And today, Chuck, we'll cover, I'm going to ask you about some of your mentors, and we might even laugh about some of our times back when we worked together at Deep. I always ran into you over the years. I always found you to be a humble and effective risk manager. And I think as a value engineering really is all about risk. I mean, it's understanding what works, what's worked before, what'll work again. And detailed engineering often needs the input of a practical guy like Chuck. So, by the way, I call you Chuck, but how did you get that nickname, Charles?
This is a Scottish thing where Charles was shortened to Chuck, just like Robert becomes Bob and Edward becomes Ted and things like that.
Oh, that's correct. So you're Scottish.
Well, no, actually the name Charles came out by accident. I'm named after my father. Now he immigrated from Holland, but his Dutch name is Klaas. So they made him anglicize his name. So the English for Klaas is Clarence. So he opted for Charles instead of Clarence. Otherwise I would have been a Clarence.
And then, okay, got it. So, so let's go to when we first met, because I thought I was had a pretty long experience level, but I met you at Deep, and you'd already been there 3 years, if you recall. You're a master grad, civil engineering, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And you were always very kind to me, Chuck, and I don't know, I can't remember you losing money on your jobs.
There was the odd one, but I was sometimes criticized for maybe not having the volume of some of the other PMs, but generally I probably brought in as much revenue with fewer dollars spent. That was always the thing I liked, and I had a ton of repeat clients.
Yeah, I think people understood you to be honest and effective, for sure. I believe that you had some good mentors in Dave Miller and Bill Lardner and Peter McDonald, who's a real class guy as well. We should put a word in for Peter, because he was your direct all those years, very much a partner in estimating, right?
At the very early start, it was Alan McNabb who was the chief estimator. Then Alan, of course, left to start up the Western Canada office, and Peter took over Alan's job. So yeah, Peter was pretty much it from about 1980 onward.
Yeah, no, he was a very good customer guy as well. So you seem to have a lot of, Dave Miller really liked you. And the nice thing about Deep, if I recall, is they believe the estimator should be the project manager. And I saw that model work very well.
I can't see how you would do it any other way in the heavy civil construction business.
But yet general contractors often will have estimators, and not necessarily
that's right,
project managers, but in our, at least Deep seemed to get it right. So tell me, Dave Miller, of course, passed, and I got a lot from Dave Miller and Bill Lardner. Maybe you can speak a little bit about Peter, Dave, and Bill in that order.
All right. Peter kind of let me figure out what I needed to be doing. He was very supportive. He would like to review my work, but there was a fairly high level of trust from Peter, which I respected. And towards the end of my time at Deep, he actually had me mentoring some of our younger estimators coming into the office for the first time, which was a real treat. I took a lot of pleasure in that.
Deep certainly produced a lot of good engineers. You know, Mark Montgomery worked there. There was a whole handful of people that came through that company before it was eventually sold. And now, for the benefit of anybody who doesn't know, Deep is owned with anchor shoring by GFL. So you went all the way to 2002, Chuck, 23 years. And when you left, Dave Miller was he still alive?
Yes. Actually, Dave passed away in 2005, not long after I came back from the United States to work in Canada at Birmingham.
Yeah, that was one of my great mentors. And Bill Lardner, what do you remember about Bill?
Well, you and I had the good fortune of spending some time with Bill and not that long ago on our DOWG venture. Bill was just he epitomized what I considered to be an engineer. Like, he was a gentleman, he was knowledgeable, smart, courteous, but yet could be tough when he needed to be tough. And as I said, I learned from him some of the technical, and he was very sharp on the non-technical things, such as the business side, the cash flow, the forecasting, the planning, a real visionary in that regard. Dave was very much more down to earth, but the Deep wouldn't have been what it was without both Bill and Dave. Dave was the guy who sat back and said no. And every company needs a guy that says no. He's not saying no, he's saying go away and come back with a better argument before I say yes.
Yeah, no, they were something else to watch. I mean, Dave, I got a lot out of my relationship with Dave because Dave was more operational, and I got that operations job when Norm Como left. But certainly, Bill, just to mention DOWG, Natter, and sorry, was also a big Bill Lardner fan. How could you not be? But we did design optimization working group because I think even Bill saw that we could make a difference. And I think he was in his early 90s when he was still
yes,
showing up at Ishwood's office.
Yeah, coming out, driving himself, had a girlfriend, and went down, spent a lot of time at his condo down in Marco Island in the cold weather, and then he had a condo in Toronto somewhere, I believe. He lost his wife Ruth, unfortunately, a few years before that. I'm going to say that must be going back maybe 5 years, and she was a great lady as well. I was a guest at their home on a number of occasions. Just great folks.
Yeah, I was at their home a couple of times too. They were very welcoming and very. I guess you'd call them British. Would you say they were very British?
Bill
waspy, was perhaps you could say that. Yeah. I don't know, waspy or whatever, but I'm okay with the King James Bible in any case. So then after you left Deep, you went to the States, Chuck. Tell me a little bit about that, just from your own recollection, because we lost touch around that time, and you worked in Virginia, of all places.
Correct. So yeah, a few years before, you had left Deep a number of years before to go to Matthews, and then you took the project with them, or the assignment with the mechanical contractor based in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, and moved away from Newmarket, where we were actually neighbors, if you remember.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun drinking beer when I still drank beer.
I got a call one day from a recruiter from Pittsburgh, believe it or not, and I don't know how he found my name, but he said he had a client that was searching for an engineer that had experience on the contracting side of the excavation support industry, Deep Foundations industry, but that also had design skills. And he was finding that a very difficult combination to achieve. But that firm, unlike Deep, did all their design work in-house, whereas at Deep we farmed out our design work, but often it fell to me to develop the concept in order to get a bid out the door. We didn't get a set of drawings to even bid on back in the day. Nowadays, these guys get drawings handed to them that are already designed. We didn't have that. So I learned from working with people like Brian and with Nader and with another colleague, Chandra Hira, and with Roy Walker. I picked up whatever I could from them about the design side.
Yeah, no, you were a good student, always learning, as you said. I remember you did a very neat drawing, and if you recall, Matt Janes talked about how Brian could draw it to scale, taught a young engineer to draw it to scale, and you were very good at that. You went through a lot of squared paper, I think, Chuck.
Yeah, I did indeed. Well, you know what I found was that drawing it out helped me to visualize the problem and come up with the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And when I keep trying to tell the young generation has lost that skill, and I keep on trying to tell them, if you start to lay it out and you can start to visualize what it is you need to do. You know, it's I don't know if you want to call it a lost art, but I now have a new group of people I'm trying to mentor, and we're trying to set up a series of tutorials where I actually walk them through my process. So that's coming.
Well, you know, Chuck, you should film that. We could do probably another podcast down the road together, because you really were a very neat, accurate estimator. And you would do, I recall you would do the full elevation, and often, you know, people will do a section and maybe get the elevation wrong or the total square footage wrong, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, I'll never forget watching the detail you put into things. And I think when you look at the amount of money that's at stake, maybe a little less production by some estimators is a good idea. And you know, I can't say that you work every day, Chuck, and you did, what did we do, 9-10 hours a day, right?
Oh, there was long days back in those times. Luckily, we had a reasonably short commute to the office, which was nice. You know, so you know,
half an hour
living
down the 404.
Yep, it was actually a very easy trip. I was 20 years in Newmarket, and I still miss the place.
Yeah, that was a great town to grow up in. And you have 3 boys, Chuck? Mark?
I do. Yep, 3
Mark,
sons,
Brian,
all
and Matthew. Yeah,
Matthew. Yep, all born in Newmarket at South Lake General Hospital, and as were your kids, I believe.
yeah. There's they were great times. My son Johnny is 36 and my daughter is 34, I believe.
Yeah.
And you know, you're a great father too, Chuck. I really have a lot of respect for your full game family, you know, and even getting to the States. That's something I've never done. But at TerraTech, you actually did soil nailing, correct? You got involved in shotcrete with those guys. And that was a fairly basic design principle, right? Where you would nail it, and that would be like a block of soil. So what were we after there?
Yes, we did a lot of temporary.
Explain a little bit of soil.
Yeah. So that went a little bit sideways. Yeah, TerraTech did a lot of work for highway contractors on sort of the temporary roadway protection type work. They did micropiles. They did temporary and permanent tiebacks. They did not own large diameter drill rigs or pile drivers, because it's relatively easy in the US to rent that out or obtain that service. We were more on the technical side of things with and actually the highway guys would have us do their design. We would tell them how many piles they needed to drive or drill, and then we would do all the rest of the work for them. So I worked in New York City, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Washington, DC, West Virginia, and Virginia.
Yeah, very good experience. And then you had to come back. I remember we talked before the show. We talked last week, and I realized that, you know, you had to come back for your consideration of your boys, right? Because they couldn't work down there, right?
Yeah, the immigration process is pretty painful. So we were down there. I was there on a work visa that was renewable every 3 years. But I was only one in the family permitted to work. So my family had the permission to reside in the United States, but not to work in the United States. And the plan was to stay there and to eventually gain full green cards so everyone could work. But I learned it was going to take years and years and years for this to come about. And uncertain times were coming in the United States. There was going to be that real estate crisis, which happened a few years afterwards. There was the coming invasion of Iraq. A few things that were not sort of maybe that stable. And I lived in a little town called Winchester, Virginia, in the northern Shenandoah Valley. about 120 kilometers west of Washington, D.C., which is quite likely the world's biggest nuclear target. Just something to think about.
Yeah, I got your ass out of there, put it that way. And then you came to
Oh,
Birmingham, so you worked for Patrick.
Yes, I did.
And Peter Smith was there then? Was
Peter Smith had come on board a couple of years before as the nuts and bolts general manager guy. Peter was an engineer with a manufacturing background, so there was good synergy with their Birminghamer side of things, which manufactured equipment.
And, Patrick and Peter both did admirable job. And so did they eventually, you jumped over, I guess, to, now I'm going to move 3 years there. And so you learned a lot about pile driving because you would have had to bid sheeting and pile driving and all that work, right?
Yeah. I learned about cofferdams and I learned about marine bulkheads as well and did some on the water work, which I had never had a chance to do before. So
Chuck, did you ever feel that you maybe thought you should go, like at Isherwood, did you stamp anything at Isherwood? You were there for a while on contract, I guess, right?
I'm actually Isherwood is still a client, and I do stamp the occasional document here and there if requested to. I am covered under their professional liability insurance and also their C of A, which is the certificate of authorization. So I don't do engineering work for the general public. So I'm not an actual practicing engineer to the public. I work for clients who pay me for my services, and not all of it's engineering.
Yeah. So Nader Ansari, can you talk a little bit about Nader Ansari? Because he's a wonderful guy.
Yes, Nader is he's a former classmate of yours, I believe, or maybe not in the same year, but you were both Western grads.
Correct.
Nader came to work for Brian. Up until then, Brian Isherwood was basically a one-man show. He did everything, and Nader joined him still when Brian was still working out of his house on the east end of Oakville in, I want to say, 1988. And one of his first assignments was coming out to do the field work, including the monitoring readings at the Chelsea Inn project, if you remember the one we did for Ellis Don.
Yes.
Where we did that parallel wall, that dummy wall, because of the issues with the ladies social club there. That it's interesting that the job super there was another friend of ours, Edward Kolakowski Martin.
Yes, very good guy.
And Ed now works with me for Nader on contract as well. Ed is in his 70s now, still going strong, still going to sites, and actually he might be a candidate for a future podcast.
That would be good. I'd love. Hey, can you say hi to Ed when you see him?
I have his contact info. I can even send it to you.
Yeah, do that, because that's a great idea. I mean, he's got the gray beard, I'm sure, by now. Right?
Oh yeah. Well, think of his vast experience in Africa,
right?
And some of the stories he could tell.
Yeah, no, I'm going to touch base. I'll definitely put him on the list. So then after Patrick and Peter, you went to C3 Environmental for 4 years. That was an interesting. Was that a big job, or?
I was brought on mainly if they had a very large deep excavation remediation in Midtown Toronto, adjacent to a hostile neighbor with a 19-story building on spread footing. So we had some pretty tricky case on wall work to do, and we didn't have a tieback agreement, so we had to do a dead man wall and brace it. And so I guess they had already contracted Anchor Shoring to do this work, and they approached me because I think they wanted someone on their team that knew that business that could help them to sort of manage their subcontractor. So as it turned out, Anchor Shoring was quite appreciative of the fact that I came on board, and the people they sent to the site were excellent, and their operations guys, Mike Lesage and Tommy Stack, were on hand a lot. All great guys. The site was very strict on health and safety, and they bought into everything and complied with everything. And the job went quite well for them. And after that wrapped up, I spent some time. We tried to get some more work like that. We didn't have too much success. Then I spent some time down in the U.S. on some of our Waterloo barrier projects, doing a little bit of troubleshooting and problem solving and dealing with some pretty the US, Eastern US market, that some of the clients are pretty tough, pretty difficult. The unions are tough. So it's a whole different environment for sure.
So where was that Waterloo barrier? You would go travel around, like you
Yep.
literally went out of town and got a place for 3 months, and
That's basically what it was. The first one I was parachuted into was nearly done, but we had to do some tricky remedial work, and it was out in Bayshore in Long Island. It was a former manufactured gas plant, and there was coal tar contamination in the groundwater and in the soil, and it was only 6 blocks from the Atlantic Ocean. So it was a bit of an environmental headache. And the other large one was one in the Bronx, and again, this was a former gas plant site, and I guess the original gas manufacturer had sold it to a developer who built a building on it, and then they started, smelling fumes, and things were seeping through the cracks in the asphalt and that. And so the owner of the heritage owner of the property was Con Ed, Consolidated Edison, which is a huge entity, and they ended up taking the site back over and gutting the building, rebuilding it, and remediating the site. So I was involved in that project as well. So
for the benefit of anyone listening, because even I have to refresh my memory, the Waterloo barrier was a patent from the University of Waterloo Engineering Department, correct?
correct, yeah.
And
So they reached out to C3 to be their construction arm, fieldwork arm, to help them do the field scale testing.
is it still viable? Like, I think of cold rolled sheets as something that doesn't seal, but hot rolled sheets, they typically seal, but I suppose not to the degree that the Waterloo barrier allowed. Wasn't it just a joint seal? That was,
Well, no, what we did was we actually created an oversized cold rolled interlock that we could get a 20 millimeter diameter flushing hose down, flush the joint, and trimmy in a very high strength superfine grout, and that had a tremendous permeability, and by the fact that we could flush the joints, verify that they were flushed and clear of obstructions, and then tremmy grout them, that was the verification that we had a seal.
is that a patent? Did they have a patent?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a patent. And C3 is a licensed installer of the product, which is the trademark of the, the university set up a separate entity, WBA, Waterloo Barrier Inc., to actually manage this. And they also enlisted the help of the Rollform Group, who are based in Cambridge, to manufacture the actual specialty oversized interlock piling.
Oh, now it's coming back now. I never did any of that work, but I remember talking to you over the years, and I was aware that you were involved in that. And really, okay, now we go to a very interesting time, I'm sure. Geo-Foundations, Todd Edmonds.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Todd and I had been colleagues from the old days. We served on the CGS executive together, the Canadian Geotechnical Society executive, and that's how I got to know him. And we stayed in touch when I was down in the States. And even when I came back and I was with C3, he actually phoned me up one day and said, meet me up in Richmond Hill. I got something to show you. And it was one of the first jet grouting projects in Ontario. I got exposed to that. I actually ended up utilizing that technique on the Midtown Toronto remediation job in one area to immobilize the contaminants in an area we couldn't actually excavate. So about 2 years later, I met up with him, and he said, what are you doing? I says, well, I'm at C3 and they're treating me great, but the environmental business isn't really for me. And he said, let's have lunch and talk. And it went from there.
Yeah, no, that's coming back now. Todd was a great guy. He was another mentor to both of us, a good friend of mine, and was very professional. And so he was able to pull it off and sell his company to Keller, correct?
Well, actually, he sold it to Hayward Baker, which was a business unit of Keller. Keller ultimately basically wiped out all the differently branded business units, and it's all now Keller.
So when they came from Keller, England, I suppose it was British, wasn't it? Or,
the original company was Swiss, actually, but the current Keller PLC is headquartered in London.
They certainly have a lot of different companies, and they're all under Keller. So what was the culture like there, Chuck, after Keller got it?
Under the Hayward Baker portion, which was the first couple of years, it was quite great. The one neat thing that Hayward Baker does is every 2 years they bring all of their project managers together at a nice resort for a 4-day workshop session with a lot of socializing and networking. And it's basically intended to encourage people from the different offices to get together with each other. And I was lucky enough to attend 2 of those, one in Phoenix and one in San Antonio. And 300 guys in your business all in one resort. It's just an amazing time. Just talking jobs and talking business and whatever.
Yeah, you must have a lot of contacts. You must have a very large Rolodex, Chuck, or database, you could say. It's hard to keep in touch with everybody, but do you ever get stuff out of the blue? You know, people contact you, or they just everyone's busy, eh? So
the one guy I tried to stay in touch with was my colleague at TerraTech, John Bennett, who was former chair of the Geo-Foundations Institute Micropile Committee. He's now a freelance consultant based in working out of his home in West Virginia, but he's worked for companies based in Pittsburgh and in southeastern Pennsylvania. John's he has his own podcast now about micropile design. It's actually quite cool, and I see his stuff on posts on LinkedIn as well.
Well, that'd be interesting. I'd like to send me his contact also, because he would be a very good guest.
He'd be absolutely great.
Go ahead.
He's funny. He's a funny guy. He'd be fabulous on your. I'm going to see if I can. If I don't know how to do this, I'll try and send you the link to the one podcast. I don't know if it's a blog or a podcast he does, but it's a regular thing when he talks about micropiles and design. So
micropiles seem to have really taken off with the Europeans, and with Todd in particular, he saw an opportunity there. Have you had a look at the one? I sent you some of the patents that I had, and I just wanted to see if, my idea of that combined modulus pile is that what I'm trying to do there, Chuck, is I'm trying to use the caisson idea where we get skin friction and end bearing working together. And that could be quite economical, but a drill open condition.
It's got to be the right soils.
And to touch on, the other reason I wanted you to come on the show for sure was, to realize that not everything needs a Luffer casing. I mean, we've got a generation of engineers, like literally 20 years of guys.
Yes.
Not to judge any of them. They're all good guys, good engineers, good engineering schools. But when they come on with the Europeans having brought 880, 1 meter, 1.2 meter Luffer, and everything's, pushed to the bottom of an excavation. And maybe that's why secants became as popular as they are. I mean, you recall we put caisson walls next to buildings.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of ground where we would, remember some of the superintendents, Jack Reed, Elmer Burney, we would do caisson walls. We innovated a lot of stuff together, but the top liner frequently can seal off that upper water. And Miller would always debate that, and we would get more production with very good results and just oversize the top, if you remember.
Well, sometimes we had 2 or 3 different telescope sizes to get down.
Right.
Once we started using vibratory drivers to drive and extract casings, some of that need went away. But now, of course, vibratory drivers are pretty much banned in the city of Toronto. So that's where the Leffer stuff has really taken hold, unfortunately.
Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, but it's certainly expensive.
Oh, it's slow and expensive. You're absolutely correct.
So did you have a chance to look at that one shotcrete patent where I do 2 layers of waterproof shotcrete and I drain the shoring?
Yes, I'd have to get a bit better explanation of where you're draining it to, but yeah, I did manage to leaf through that a little bit. And no, I have a little bit of background where we've had problem water where maybe we did a bit more of a low tech approach, but we basically put some thin face plywood at the back, meshed the panel, shot the panel against the plywood, left some grout lines, and then grouted afterwards behind the plywood to create our finished product. Did that a little bit at the first phase of Union Station.
Yeah, so depending on the ground in Toronto, I find 80% of it is suitable. And basically my theory is that I'll qualify any job anyway. Like I don't want to be just letting anyone go willy-nilly with a license. to save that kind of money. And it's a large amount of savings when you get rid of these CO2 involved in the secant piling industry. Now, basically, the drain board goes behind, and if you go into Toronto when they're doing those raft slabs, Chuck, let's say Queen and Yonge, right? Places we know are dry. The bottom is dry. So why do we put a raft slab down there? Why do we put a caisson wall all the way around? Those are the no-brainers, I call them.
There's the hydrogeology experts tend to be quite conservative, I think, and overly conservative in my personal view. And I'm not sure if you have anyone on your side of things that can sort of refute some of these recommendations that developers are getting a recommendation. They're afraid not to follow it. That's what's going on.
So I'm glad you asked me that, Chuck. Well, my concept, and I want you to be an associate partner of Footprint as well, is that, we ask people with many years experience. So Shane O'Neill is somebody who understands the Toronto soils and works all across Canada. And he's a doctor, and they do a lot of mining when they're doing that properly, but he's a friend of Matt Janes, and we just did his show. So he'll be, I think you can get him now on the podcast.
I've got the link to it, Martin. Just haven't had a chance to check it out, but I intend to. Yeah,
so really good guy, and by all means call him. He's very approachable. I did a job with him in Nova Scotia, and there was a tidal fluctuation, similar idea that, basically, we got a bathtub at the bottom of these condos, and for $25,000, he saved the owner $1.5 million. So he is important. That you nailed it on the head, Chuck. I mean, that guy, that we call him a detailed hydrogeologist with experience, looks at the permeability of the soil, the layers of the soil, and he would be a key guy that I would ask in my qualification because I don't like risk either. I have no intention of having anyone take risk or me take risk. Never did really. I mean, Dave Miller taught us not to take risk, manage it, right?
And there's a different word, there's risk averse and risk savvy.
Yeah.
So they're two different things.
So what do you mean by risk savvy? That would be Dave Miller.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were good at it. So tell me, remember the guy from Vermeer? And he used to say, and you've repeated it to me recently, the best job I never got. Right.
Yeah. Well, it's when is it smart to you say you're getting low on work and you jump at a job, you seem to like it, but then you don't get it. But the guy that does get it basically loses his shorts. And that's when you sit back and chuckle and say, that's the best job I never got.
Frequently, those types of contractors work in the bad soils, and they might think they can get away without caisson walls and shoring. And that's where the knowledge below grade can make or break general as well. And they have someone like yourself who they can ask, but they'll bid it asking, right?
The GCs, our business, Martin, is like voodoo science to them, unfortunately, and they get very nervous about it. And even structural engineers think it's this magical sorcery that we do. So it's taken a whole lifetime just trying to convince people, no, why don't you learn a little bit about it yourself so you understand. So there's a handful of guys out there doing structural work now that are very cognizant of the below ground work and understand value and understand good engineering and bad engineering. It's getting better.
I find that the consolidation of detailed engineering houses hasn't helped in geotechnical engineers. They're very big companies. And their model, something Shane said on the podcast is that a lot of the hydrogeologists with those larger firms, they simply don't have the time. So where you hire a boutique guy like a Brian Isherwood or Shane, and they have the time to look at it properly, and for a reasonable fee, they do look at it properly. They save a ton of money. So that's my recommendation is Shane O'Neill. He's actually on my website, so you can.
Okay, I'd like to check. I haven't heard him before now, but I'd certainly like to check it out.
Matt Janes thinks a lot of them, and
that's good enough for me.
So now after Keller, Solitage, 5 years, Chuck, on and off with Solitage.
Well, actually, no, the Solitanche arrangement is only started in early 2020, just before the pandemic, as a matter of fact.
Okay, so tell
Up
me
until
about
then,
those. That's Birmingham, basically.
they had just done the rebranding to Solitanche Bashi Canada from Birmingham about 6 months prior to that.
And Patrick did a very good job arranging that sale, I believe. And I guess Peter also would get credit for
Yes, but
stick
Peter's
handling
been
that.
out of the picture for a number of years, actually, when the final handover came.
And so tell me what they're like, Chuck. They're doing a broad range of things. I think ex-Keller people with them. Is it correct? There's
they basically inherited the Birmingham. Well, actually, Solitanche Bashi, which is a large company based in Paris, France, with their U.S. entity known as Nicholson Construction, based in Pittsburgh, purchased Birmingham Construction and Geo-Foundations from Alberta, and merged the whole shebang into Solitanche Bashi Canada. So there's some, and out west, they've actually gained some ex-Western Canada Keller people. And in the east, we've had a couple of key recruits that came from the Geo-Foundations part of Keller over to try and get them sort of, they struggled for a few years, and they're working back towards some profitability now. And they've had a few hiccups here and there, but we've got some really nice work on the books right now, and some pretty high profile work, including the very large nuclear waste remediation in the Port Hope Harbor, and successfully completed the Randall Reef project in the Hamilton Harbor, which is a large environmental project, and working on a brand new ferry terminal in Kingston on the harbor, and but basically just looking around for they're very good at doing very deep H piles, for example. They've got incredibly good equipment for that sort of thing, and a lot of innovative, like reverse circulation drilling, things like that. Getting quite a bit of work. They're rehabilitating a lot of the dams, for example, on the Trent Severn Waterway now, and they've got getting a lot of work out of that. So, and we're trying to do a bit of conventional in urban work as well. Some we're not really chasing the downtown Toronto condo market. There's enough guys doing that sort of thing, but we're doing a lot of work with Waterfront Toronto, for example, in the Portlands area. Just landed actually a sinkhole repair job on the ship channel, and we're in discussions with a group that's going to build a giant sound studio complex on the ship channel at the turning basin down in the Portlands. So there's a couple of neat things in the pipeline there.
I think they're bidding the Canada line, are they not? Are they not one of the
we are bidding 3 stations on the downtown section of the Ontario line to Vinci Construction, which ironically is a parent company of Solitanche Bashi. Vinci is tendering a portion of the work, which includes 6 downtown stations running from basically Parliament Street over to this Canadian National Exhibition. So GFL is looking at the 3 stations west of Yonge, and Solitanche Bashi is working with them on the 3 stations east of Yonge right now. That has had multiple stages of closing. I think the technical close is coming early summer on that, because it's basically a design build project.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to go see tomorrow. Actually, I'm going to see Bill's grandson,
Tom Lardner.
Yeah, he's doing his PhD with KYLO at.
He's done his PhD. He's Dr. Lardner.
Is he Dr. Lardner? I think he might be still. Well, he's there anyway. I guess that's a good. But he's with ESP, and they're bidding with Aecon. Yep. So he was asking me about it, and he analyzed some of what I was doing, and it was quite intrigued. So we're going to go down and have lunch tomorrow at Western. It'd be good to go back to the old Western hallowed halls, as they call it. Anyway, I tell you, you could do this system and save a pile of money on the temporary support work. And somebody who's quite seriously looking at it is GFL. So maybe they'll drag you and Solitanche to bid some of those other stations with some, because on temporary works, I believe you got a bit of freedom. Now, whether you have freedom on the, I think you said some of the walls are 3, 4, 5 feet thick. Those suburbs.
No, that was what took place on the Eglinton Crosstown Light Rail, which is nearing completion. I worked on 5 of the stations on that line in some form or another, and got to see quite a bit of the construction, particularly of Keel Station and Young Station. Yes, they're very thick walls, extremely. There's a very, very, very heavy design in these stations. And I don't know if they want them to be an underground bomb shelter if and when, or what the logic is behind it. But the existing subway, which was opened in the late 1950s, the walls are only 2.5 feet thick, which we thought was ridiculous at the time. But these guys are like double that now.
Well, I think goes back to the large engineering houses, and probably they're shotcreting them, which is not a bad idea. And but not only could I take the waterproofing out, but I would get that, if they let me decide, I wouldn't have any leaks, and I would have I'd be half the price. So for the benefit of TTC, half the price. We promote E5. They're not going to let me do it, of course, but we promote E5, which has done 150 bridge decks in Indiana. So it's too bad our MTO wouldn't look at some of the products that they use. They take 10 years to change a product. And it's all about the admix. If the admix is done right, and I combine 3 admixes actually with basaltic fibers, and I can do shotcrete without any cracks. So
that's impressive.
E5 is definitely a fantastic technology. It's true colloidal silica, nano silica patented with Purdue University, actually. And he did one of the podcasts, Joe Saturday. So all we're really doing is providing an engineering assistance in trying to get Canada up to speed and for the benefit of lowering CO2. And we can make concrete last, I'm convinced, Chuck, up to 200 years. It's better than it was. But once you get a crack and you try to seal the crack with crystalline, that doesn't really work. So we're looking to change the industry that way, with common sense, just using technologies on admix alone, which allowed for this shotcrete bathtub idea. Did you look at the geothermal I sent you, by the way?
I haven't yet. I know how geothermal works in general.
So these are drilled shaft geothermals. And I'm gonna suggest that we're gonna do another one of these, Chuck, but because we could just talk and talk and talk. Now so Solitash, by the way, one of your boys is an engineer, is he not?
My oldest son, Mark, is a materials engineer, also a MAC grad. He works for a testing company in Mississauga. They're CSA and ULC certified. He does all manner of different things, from burst testing of hoses to actually checking material storage racks for seismic resistance, things like that. He likes the job because he can go out in the back shop, set up his test, carry out his test, go into the front, get on his computer, and write up his report. So he absolutely loves that hands-on element of it, which is really, that's what makes good engineers.
No, I agree. And the other boys
right now, my middle son is working with him. My middle son is an aircraft mechanic. He's almost all the way through his apprenticeship. Unfortunately, as you know, 3 years ago the jet stopped flying, and so he wasn't having much success working in that industry. So he's now working with his brother, because he's got the mechanical aptitude. It's a real good fit.
So what do you think makes a great value engineer, Chuck? When I say value engineer or detailed engineer, Roy Walker was quite the good detailed engineer, and he passed, of course. Is Chandra still go? Does he still go?
Chandru is in his 80s. He also works with Natter on contract. Actually, I was on the phone with him about 3-4 weeks ago, because he was trying to track down another colleague of ours, Mike Dakin, who, of course, was co-founder of Geo-Foundations, which ultimately became acquired by Keller. So Chandra's still kicking and going strong.
So he hasn't lost anything. And
oh no, not at all. He can design you a bridge on the back of a napkin, literally, over lunch. and be just as good as anything that someone spent hours and hours of computer and CAD time doing.
So when it comes to detail designers, you know, I like Tom O'Rourke, and I obviously like Isherwood, and we've lined up Turan out in Vancouver and Isherwood out in Vancouver.
Right.
And we hope to get Geo-Pacific online because they have a lot of influence in Vancouver. But it's interesting enough that that secant replacement system is really showing a lot of interest in Vancouver because there's such a wealth of shotcrete people there.
Yes, there is. There is.
So many people that can spray on whatever mud you can buy.
Yeah.
So we have access to those products, and we're going to put it in the Vancouver Ready Mix. There's actually they're going to shoot Billy Chen from Torrent is involved in getting E5 specified for a head wall to do a large job that Torrent's got, and I think it's 10,000 cubic meters. They were willing to. It's called Shot Cure, and it's a specially formulated nanosilica for shotcrete. It's more discreet. And of course, shotcrete has that higher velocity. So it, instead of a blindside form, it results in more consolidation to begin with. So all I do, Chuck, is I just put a 5, and we did this system at HC Macon, 5 MPa, and you can be 2 to 2.5 meters apart. If the soil is going to stand and if the soil is going to drain, then we put a drain board behind that shotcrete, and we weld clips, a light layer of mesh, second 5-inch layer doesn't have any mesh. All it has to be is clean, and we give a 15-year warranty to the waterproofing. So
now, I saw your notes. It's trowel finished, which means you need some guys with the appropriate sort of skill.
Wood flow. Yeah. So it's a wood flow. Okay. It's not steel trowel. I'm not trying to be final wall, but you could take it to final wall. I mean, if I was bidding, I would definitely want to. Why not save the money? Think of the cost of money. It's 40% less schedule, Chuck.
Yeah.
40% less. And you'd agree that the anchor loads will be lighter because there is no damming up of the water. So that's
you're not letting water accumulate. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in most of the soils in downtown below, say, College Street, there's no groundwater left.
Right.
There is no groundwater remaining in the ground because of all the deep basements.
So why do they put raft slabs? It's the biggest waste of geotechnical, it's just criminal. You really need the Ashbridges Bay thing, right? Where they said we don't want to combine storm and sanitary, but the storm and sanitary problem is from old storm, right? They've analyzed the wrong problem because Toronto's an old city. Remember how they built reservoirs along the lakeshore for a while? They were going to capture that, not go into the lake, but that was storm water. And you still get storms that really you could store the storm water. I've even thought about that in terms of using the raft slab depth for some tanks. I think I talked to Verdi, Dennis Fernand, the president of Verdi, recently, and he had 40 jobs with bathtubs in downtown Toronto. 40. And I believe some of them are 4 and 5 feet thick, correct?
Well, you talk now then about bathtubbing and keeping the water out, but I don't know if you might be been a bit younger than me, never had a chance to work with the late Bill Trow, the founder of Trow, which is now EXP. But Bill Trow said to me, "You'll never stop the water, just give it another place to go."
Right. And I remember Bill, he was a great friend of Bill Lardner, if you recall.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Out on the job, hauling his camera around, snapping pictures, climbing through the mud. Again, another hands-on engineer that had a big hand in shaping the face of Toronto, the built part of Toronto.
Yeah, I remember Brian Isherwood coming into Deep and dealing with Bill Lardner. The two of them, they really set the bar very high. They didn't have any problems. They started the monitoring. If you recall, Brian was onto that monitoring thing, and Bill would
long before.
Yeah.
It was the observational method, going back to Dr. Ralph Peck.
Yeah.
And how do you observe? You monitor.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, Natter's taken that into a whole business unit. So
exactly, and they do good work. Well, I'm actually seeing some amateur monitoring being done on projects, which is very disappointing after the quality I normally see out of Monitor.
So you're seeing
anyways.
people argue that they can just put a lookout on and set up a
Yeah,
transit.
yeah. Yeah, that's some pretty funky stuff I'm starting to see, and no ability for repeatability. So, anyways, that's another. So you asked me about value engineering.
Yeah,
Okay, so the one thing was I hated to have a low price with a low markup just to win work. What I wanted to do was to look at what was there and come up with a more economical way to build what was there so I could make more money on it. That was the motivation. Get the job, have a better price, but have more money in the job because you've cut out the waste or streamlined the waste. That's what value engineering is.
right. I mean, that's where when you did your elevations, you caught the fact that in a lot of times you could either bench it off or find that there was more than enough room. It really needed both, right? Plan view, elevation view.
Yep.
Yeah.
And also understanding in excavation geometry and sloping. As a matter of fact, I did a tutorial issue with back last year on how to evaluate slopes from looking at a drawing and understand where the top of the slope had to be and where the bottom of the slope had to be, and just understanding that problem.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what you charge, Chuck, but whatever it is, it's going to save someone money and really, the best job they never got. Something that hopefully people will remember. Chuck Kranz's lessons. You could almost do the lessons of the detailed engineer. Certainly, there's so many people that have learned by mistakes, and people will say, "Oh, they don't want to take risk." Let's go to the caissons that we used to do, Chuck. Like 75 tons a square foot. We would test, test them to 150, and now all of a sudden somebody said, "Well, 50 tons square foot," and we used to go.
It's
1
going
meter
backwards.
Yeah, it's gone
Things are progressing, and I don't know why.
Well, maybe because people figured the load test, but remember Bill and Dave, they were the ones who did those plate load tests, right?
Yeah.
It's not unreasonable to do it.
No.
But it seems crazy. And then you get the rebar cages. I think we have to challenge them, and only by having guys with your experience do you have any credibility at the table. So continue to freelance, Chuck. I don't know if you want to stay with Solitage forever, but I guess there's a certain convenience to helping one team and getting the respect within one team at a time, right? So
no, I still have my hand in it with Isherwood. I'm still helping Natter out on a bit of a more reduced basis now, but I'm still involved in some pretty cool stuff over at Isherwood as well right now.
Yeah, they certainly they're the Cadillac as a detailed shoring engineer. Natter maintains a high bar. He's actually in Peru, I think.
They have a very good internal process of checks and balances that things still get out the door sometimes, like oopses, but they're very, very low, very much better control of that than a lot of, I see output coming out the door and I just shake my head from other engineers. Like, how did this get out the door? How did this escape scrutiny?
So below grade, how would you can you define it as you could probably verbally articulate, is it 4 checks? Is it like obviously drafting, engineering, working combined, correct?
Well, what they have is that first off, the project manager does the initial check after the CAD people do an overlay. They do markups and they go back to the CAD for maybe another round. Then there's a CAD check. So another CAD person looks at the CAD, like the style, the detailing, the ghosting, the things like that, and they give markups on that. And then there is an ends check just on the engineering by another independent guy. And then for certain size jobs, there's an independent reviewer who's not the stamping engineer, that after when it's almost all ready to go. So they have a list of the criteria for which size projects and which type of projects need all those levels. And then sometimes there's even a gray hair review too.
Well, I think
that-
frequently there's always the gray haired review at Natters qualifies for gray haired review, and Matt James certainly, and Ed.
well, Matt will say he's a no hair review. Matt will say he's a no hair review.
No, Natter's a great guy. It's an expression and something that I think, you say you're always learning, but something Natter says, we got 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. You've heard that from Natter?
Yep, I have. Yep. He's a pretty good listener.
Yeah, no, he certainly is. So, Chuck, we pretty well used up our hour. It wasn't hard,
It's been
and
fun.
I really appreciate, and we'll follow up some more, Chuck, with how we can help each other. But my idea is to try and keep the gray hair active and to make a difference and tell these young people what we used to do, which never fell down. Geo-Foundations made a lot of money and they had a good process. So really, we should repeat some of the things that we did, but teach young people that. Like, I think
Well,
I find the
we're-
mentoring and the teaching was always something that was very rewarding.
Yeah, where Deep was strong back in those days was how they developed people like you and me and the people that followed us, our
Right.
process. And they were the best at developing the good people to carry on.
Yeah, you had access to the top. Right? I mean, you could go and sit with either one of them, and they had done it before. They had done it at Frankie, and they had the ethics.
Well, I would go into Dave with my handwritten estimate sheet to look at, and he'd say, you have 2 trucks too many in that estimate. Take it away and go change it and then bring it back. So that was when we had erasers and pencils. So that's how you learned. So it eventually got to the point where I very rarely had to take it away and bring it back.
Yeah, no, he had a sharp eye. I mean, he Deep liked the estimators to check with operations, and I've seen companies now that where they're trying to wing it a bit without operations input, but invariably, they're not going to be as competitive because if the guy in the field sticks his neck out on 2 extra holes a day, and we write it down there, and sometimes sign it or whatever, but everybody had honor in those days, and certainly engineers all have honor. So I think if we can go back to some of the old ways and use that equipment in a slightly different way. New equipment's great, but I don't really find that, this idea of 300,000 foot-pounds, it's hard to imagine why we need that. Right?
Well, we use it even where we don't need to use it because we have it. And it's actually a job crossed my desk where I says, we need a Watson 3000 for this job. It's perfect. And I'm asking Ed, who we mentioned earlier in the program, who still has a Watson 3000? And I was able to go to say to our client, yes, there are people that can do this. We had to do some battered hole drilling to get a pile in under a heritage foundation. And of course, with the Leffers, you cannot do that.
Well, I bought at MatCon, I bought Rumble's old machine, and then we bought 2 more. And then I think they still have the 4400s. And, but, the operators get used to a certain thing and they want a nice new machine. But Watson's a great name and they're still around,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It made us a lot of money, made my jobs a lot of money. Nice rigs like that.
Yeah. The Reed Taurus, if you remember. And then the
Well,
Watsons.
my first experience with the Bauer type rigs was when I came back from the States in 2005 to Birmingham, and we'd won a project at 22 Wellesley, right beside the TDC station, using a released BG-24 and 1 meter casings. That was my very first exposure to it. So I was already 27 years into my career before I saw this stuff.
Yeah. And you were always the guy saying, well, it'd be easier if we just drilled that open. Which I say today because I was around in the 80s too. And it was a lot. I could compete with anything going on in Toronto because I was innovative. And I remember the soil. People forget the soil drills open, but they show up with a Luffer rig. Anyway, Chuck, thanks a lot for your input today, and we'll keep in touch. And love you, bud. Take care.
Absolutely.
Right?